Homeschool How To. I'm Cheryl, and I left the life of classrooms and cubicles for home educating in the countryside. But I have no idea how to homeschool, so I interview the people who do. Join me on my quest to learn all the ways there is to homeschool. Welcome, and with us today, I have Leigh Ann Scott from Kentucky. Leigh Ann, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Cheryl. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to talk to you today.
From Kentucky yet. So
Yay!
I'm interested to hear about like what your reporting requirements and stuff like that is. But let's first get into how many kids do you have and how did you get into homeschooling?
I have 4 children. I have a girl 14, a boy 12, a boy 7, and a girl 5. So my youngest one has not started school yet. But my other 3 have been homeschooling for 3 years. I'm actually a public school teacher, so I have been doing that for close to 20 years now. And I don't know how I got started, I guess. I know several people who homeschool. I had a really good friend who lives in Tennessee who had homeschooled her kids from the start. And I was probably pregnant with my 3rd child and my husband and I went to visit her, and I remember her showing me the room that she homeschooled in, and was just telling me a little bit about what they did. They were involved in a co-op and things, and I was just really fascinated by the whole thing. But in my head, it wasn't really on my radar. I had never really known anybody who did that, and I had been in public school for such a long time at that point that I just was going to take my kids to school with me. I taught in a K through 8 school, which is actually pretty unusual for Kentucky. I think we're one of only maybe 3 or 4 districts in the whole state that did that. And so I taught middle school, but I would take my kids to school with me. And so that was just kind of what we did. But I don't know, the more and more I thought about it, the more it just seems like something that I needed to look more into. And so I started reading books and researching, and I knew a couple of other people. I realized that homeschooled. I actually have a family member. Her children are quite a bit younger than mine, but she had decided she was going to homeschool. And so I started talking to her. And once I got, a little bit more information from people, I started reading books and looking into curriculums, and COVID hit. And I said, hey, this is a good time to do it. My kids were schooling virtually. It was an absolute nightmare. I was teaching virtually, and I couldn't help my kids because I was having to work all day, and it was crazy. And I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. And that wasn't homeschool at all. That was just public school, on a computer. But so I decided that at the end of that school year, I was going to pull my kids from school and start homeschooling them. I did. And we loved it. And I wouldn't say that COVID was the reason we did it. The reason that I really started looking into it was more because we're Christians. We're a Christian family. And we, it was just my beliefs were not in alignment with the public school system. And my kids were going through the public school system. And I did not like a lot of the things they were learning and bringing home, not just academically. And so that's why we really started doing it, but we did it during COVID. It was just kind of a good time. The timing was right. And so we loved it. And 3 years later, we're still doing it.
Oh, that's awesome. So are you still teaching or did you quit your job?
Well, no, I'm still teaching. At the time that I started homeschooling, I had actually left the classroom and I had started an RTI position. So I was still working in the same school all day long. I did that for a couple of years, but I was pulling and working with small groups of students. And then about 3 years ago, about the same time that I started homeschooling, I actually got a district position. So I'm still teaching, but I'm not a classroom teacher like I had been for so many years. I'm still working in the school system, which is something that, when it comes to raising 4 kids and keeping up a household, and, sometimes you just have to budget the best you can. But my goal is to be at home with my kids as soon as possible. I don't know when that's going to happen, but I'm hoping that it'll be soon.
So that leads me to the next question. And I have had people ask me this throughout the year. How can I homeschool and work, especially if it's working outside the home? And I did have, I have one episode that'll be releasing in a couple of weeks where I saw out someone doing that very same thing. How do you make it work? Because I'd love to hear. Obviously, not everybody that works outside the home and homeschools is going to have the same way. So how do you make it work?
Right. Well, when people ask me that, I get that question a lot because that's what I hear. I hear what people say to me is, I would love to homeschool, but I can't because I work. And I say, oh, well, actually, you can because I also work. My thing is, if it's something that is really important to you, you'll make a way for it. And it's important to us. So we figure it out. The first year was hard and there was a lot of trial and error. There were a lot of tears, both mine and my children's. It was rough. We've kind of gotten into a groove now. And the easiest way for me to say it is we do a lot of, there are things that they have to do during the day. My husband is home with them. My husband works at night, so he's at home even if he's sleeping during the day. So my children are at home. They have chores. They have, some assignments and things that they have to do. And when I get home from work, I, usually jump into cooking supper and homeschooling, and it all happens at the same time. And we just kind of pick up where they left off during the day. And if they were doing something they need help with, I'll help them with it. And sometimes everything doesn't get done every day. Yeah, I try to hit reading and math every day, at least a little bit. But if everything doesn't get done every day, I just say, it'll be here tomorrow. Yeah. And so I just don't let it stress me out. I used to. I don't anymore. And, if we miss a day, sometimes I'll say, let's just do a couple things on Saturday morning. We'll knock it out and we get it done. Occasionally if I have like a day off from school, we may do homeschool that day. We did that today. And, if you could see behind my laptop right now, my kitchen table's covered in books and pencils and, things like that. But we got all of our homeschool stuff done in about 2 hours today. And so, it doesn't take that long. I think that's the biggest thing is people think I'm coming home from work and spending 6 to 7 hours. And that's just not the case. But, if we are having a hard time with something or we just run out of time, we're running up on bedtime, then I'll just say, we'll just do this tomorrow. And it's okay. I can do that. So I just make it work the best I can because it's important to me. And my kids they're funny because if they do have a day off, sometimes I'll try to make them sit down and do work in the morning and they'll say, can we wait till tonight to do that? They're so used to doing their work at night that they sometimes even on a day, they're like, let's do that tonight. I want to go outside and play. So that's what we do. So we just make it work the best we can.
So you have kids. How old was your oldest again? Did you say 14?
14.
14 and the youngest is 5. How do you, even with your husband being home, if he has to sleep so that, he can get up for work in the evening, what are they, other than, like you said, they have some chores and a couple assignments, what are you doing? What are they doing all day long? Because, and here's the angle I'm coming at. You're going to have people that are going to be like, well, if they're home all day by themselves, why don't you just put them in school? Because they'll have activities or, people that don't know any better. So what are they supposed to be doing all day long? Are you worried about too much screen time or do you have parameters around that?
We are not an anti-screen family, but, they do have, my husband has always been really into video games and that sort of thing. I don't think I've played a video game since maybe the Atari in the 80s. I don't know. I mean, I've just never loved them, but, my kids do like them. So we just, they have screens. We have an Xbox, so they do get to play those things. We just have a lot of parental controls. We just make sure that we have, some controls over those things. So, yeah, they probably do play games and things like that during the day, but there are a lot of controls over those. And when they run out of time, they run out of time and they know that. So their devices just won't work anymore. And so they just have to find something else to do. Usually that's probably when they get their schoolwork done that they're supposed to do before I get home. But my kids, they don't go to bed really early. I mean, I don't let them stay up super late, but I would say my oldest kids probably stay up till 9:30 or 10 o'clock. So they sleep later in the morning. I don't make them get up. I leave for work before they ever wake up. My youngest one, she is in a preschool right now. So I do take her and drop her off at preschool, which is not my favorite thing, but that's where she is 4 days a week. And then on Fridays, my oldest daughter keeps her. So she has a babysitter and they play, outside. I live in a really, safe neighborhood. I have a nice fenced in backyard. They play outside. We have dogs. They take the dogs outside. She just has a room full of toys. So they entertain themselves. They have chores. They have schoolwork. And yeah, they do get some screen time, but it's pretty heavily regulated. So they're not just spending all day doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel good knowing that that's the case, because if it was up to them, yeah, they'd probably just be watching TV or playing video games all day. But because we have some controls over the devices that they have, then, when they know that when their time is up, their time is up. So they've learned to entertain themselves. Sometimes they'll play a board game. Sometimes my sons have art kits. Sometimes they'll come and do some artwork, So they have learned to have certain things done by a certain time, and they've learned to entertain themselves.
Do you feel like because you work that they're not able to do like the co-ops or play groups or stuff like that? Like, is that why your goal is to not work? Obviously, you want to be with them more too, but you know what I mean?
Right.
There are certain things like I know parents that work and homeschool, and so a grandparent can take the kid to the co-op if that's what they want for the child. Yeah.
Sure.
How does that work for you guys?
It's different. It's a little bit different for us. Between my husband and I, we only have one living parent. My mother lives about an hour away from us. So occasionally my mom will come up and spend a day with them. But we don't have that either. And there is a co-op in our town. We live in a really small town. There have been some people in this town that I have gotten to know over the past 3 years who have homeschooled from the very beginning. But until I started, and I'm not a pioneer, I'm not, but I do feel like we're in the middle of this homeschool revolution. And when I started homeschooling, I know another person in the school district who was homeschooling at the time. Their child has since gone back to school, but they were homeschooling because of COVID. And they were like, we need to reach out to people and see if we can, create this homeschool community. So they started a Facebook group, and I became an admin for that. And through that, I have gotten to know a lot of people. And since we started that group, there has been a homeschool co-op that kind of blossomed out of that. And so there's another couple of families that are in charge of the homeschool co-op. We have participated in a few things, but because I work during the day, we really don't get to do that. I would like to, but and I guess a lot of families do that for the socialization. I always say my kids are pretty well socialized because, they're socialized just at home. There's 4 of them, but we go to church. They have friends outside of school. We're out and about some, so that, there's plenty of that going on. That's not really a concern for me. I honestly think, as much as I would like for my kids to be involved in some of that, my kids are really not even that interested in it. They don't really want to do a co-op. They like homeschool at home, and mom's in charge and mom does the thing, and then they get to go play, and that's what they like. So no, we don't get to do a lot of the things like that maybe we would if I wasn't home, or if I was home rather. But the truth is, I've wanted to be home with my kids since my first child was born. The very first time I had to take her to a babysitter and drop her off, and I missed the first time she crawled, and I missed, and I've missed that with all 4 of my kids. And those are times that I can't get back. I know that. But whatever time I have left until they leave the house, I'm going to try to take it. So, I can't make up for any time that I've lost. But I've always wanted to be home with my kids. I've always wanted that. And my husband and I have had a very open conversation about that for 14 years. My daughter's 14 years old. And for 14 years, it's been, I would really like to stay home with the kids. And then once I started homeschooling them, it was, okay, now I have to figure this out. And my husband has a great job. And, I have 2 master's degrees. I have 4 college degrees, and he makes twice as much money as I do because I'm a teacher. I work on a teacher salary. Yeah. Teachers don't make a lot of money. That's pretty universal. So we could not live off of my salary, the 6 of us. But we probably could his. And so I think that it's just been a slow process of me getting to stay home with my kids, but I think it's going to happen. I just do the best that I can until then. And then when it does happen, maybe we'll get to do a co-op. Maybe we'll get to be involved in some of those things. But for now, we're okay with not having that.
Yeah, and I'm with you because I probably talk more about this on like my Instagram page, but about society dangling the carrot of like the pension and stuff like that. In addition to,
Yes.
because I was a government worker for the last 16 years, so it's always
Yeah.
been this pension. Then you go to college and
Yes.
you pay your, but even the going to college, that is more, I hate like using common words like indoctrination, but more training us to think that that's
Yeah.
the way that you have to go. And I went to college not knowing what I wanted to do. So then you get out of college and you have this debt that you got to pay back. Well, I mean, you're supposed to pay back. So
Right.
you have to look for a job and then you kind of just take whatever is offered because, or whatever, falls in line for you. Not necessarily because that was your life's goal, because you don't even know what your goal is because you don't know anything about yourself. But
Yeah.
it's so easy to get loans for cars and credit cards. And so then you're more and more, it's a snowball effect that you're in this more
Yeah.
debt now. And then, you have kids. And by that time, when I know I didn't want to stay home with kids because of shows like Friends and Sex in the City. It was like they weren't stay at home moms. They were out living the high life and having
Oh, yeah.
fun. And, so I wanted to emulate that. Well, then when I got to be in my late 30s and, had my son, and I'm like, maybe I have it all backwards, but it's so easy to fall into that debt and not be able to get yourself out so that you can't, then turn the tide and stay home with your kids. And I sent my son to daycare. And now that I've been home with my daughter since she's been born, I see so many things that I missed, like you were
Mhm.
saying, the crawling. And not even that, it's just little things like if she wakes up from a nap and she's not actually ready to be
Mhm.
up, but something woke her up, she just needs to be like nursed and put back down. But in a daycare setting, it's like, oh, one is up, they're all up. And then, so how is
Mhm.
that going to impact her attitude and demeanor for the rest of the day if she didn't get a good solid nap? Or, like you said, the waking them up in the morning and rushing them out the door. We don't do that at all. My kids go to bed pretty late because my husband gets home from work and they see him. And if I can get some of the
Right.
podcast done then or whatnot, that's when they get to hang out with dad. And then it's just nice because in the morning, then it's a little quiet. I can go back to working on the podcast or getting some laundry
Yeah.
done or getting dinner started. So yeah, it's just nothing you ever are told in school that could be an option of this is how life could go too. You get two
Yeah.
options, it's we're
Yeah.
set on that path. Um, how did
Yeah.
your daughter, because she was kind of old enough to know what school was like at 11, say, when she stopped attending,
Yeah.
to now. How has
Uh-huh.
her transition been? Does she enjoy being homeschooled or does she miss the school aspect at all?
She was always so friendly and outgoing, and so she had a lot of friends, and I guess that was her biggest concern was, what about my friends? And I was like, look, you know, friends are down the road. You not being at school with them all day does not mean you can't be friends with them. So we had a couple of pretty good discussions about that. But the truth is that by the time I actually pulled them out of school, and I had already brought it up with them a few times, like, I'm thinking about doing this and we're going to try it and see how it goes. By the time I actually did it, she was begging me to take her out of school.
Wow.
And I will never forget her very last day of public school. She was in tears and she was like, Mom, can I please just not go to school next year? And I was like, yep, you got it. We're going to stay home.
And was
So,
that because of
she just,
just 11-year-old girls and the cattiness and
yes,
the
that
jealousy
was a
and
huge that was a huge part of it. I think a lot of it was, a lot of that started when she was as early as like 3rd grade. She was coming home and saying things that were inappropriate that I know she did not hear at home. And I'm like, where did you hear that? And it would be girls in her school, in her class, and she would know that there was anything wrong with it.
right.
And she was pretty relentlessly bullied that year. It kind of trickled into her 4th grade year and it got better after a little while, but there was a different couple of girls in her class that were really mean to her, and it was kind of an off and on situation all through her 5th grade year. And then the work got harder on top of the stress of my friends are my friends one day and the next day they don't want to be friends with me and I don't know where I stand with them. And that, girls are hard to get
Mhm.
along with. I don't know why. And, on top of all that, the work was getting hard and she felt like it was passing her by. She wasn't understanding it. She'd always been a really good student. And then on top of all of that, we were still in the midst of COVID. They were having to stand and sit 6 feet apart. They were having to wear a mask every day. I mean, it was just nuts. And I don't know, it kind of blew up. And I was kind of at my wit's end anyway. And I was like, I don't want to go to work and wear a mask and not be able to sit right next to somebody or have a normal conversation, but I'm an adult. I can handle it. My kids were struggling. And she was probably struggling more than anybody because on top of all of it, there was a lot of girl drama. School was getting hard and she was having a hard time concentrating. And I was like, if we homeschool, we can work at your pace. And so that's what we did. So by the time I pulled her out, she was fine. And my youngest was preschool. He didn't really know that much different anyway. And then my middle son was in 3rd grade and he was miserable during COVID, absolutely miserable. So he was fine with, it too. And so he never has loved school that much anyway. So to him, homeschool was like easier. He was like, oh, we're not going to do it all day. So I don't have to sit in a desk all day, and he's he has dyslexia, ADHD, all that. And so we, it was just better for him. So honestly, it was just better all around. And the funny thing is, a few weeks ago, my husband and I were really talking about some budgeting and was I going to have to go back to work next year and things like that. And I just asked the kids, I was like, look, I'm tired. It's hard to homeschool you all every day after I've worked all day. I was like, do you want to go back to school? And they knew that this was not something that I really wanted from them. I just wanted to kind of talk to them about it and see what their perspective was. And they all said no. No, we want to be homeschooled. And that gave me a little burst of energy, and I was
Mhm.
like, okay, we're going to keep going. Regardless of what happens, we're going to keep going. So yeah, my kids are happy with it.
And you work in a school. So, I mean, I don't know how much of your day is around, the kids, but the bullying, I find that to be such an interesting thing too, because I don't think anything is different from when, like, I'm 40, from when I was a kid. It's now like they've
Hmm.
emphasized bully, but like everyone talks about
Right.
being bullied. Nobody talks about like what their kid did too to like deserve it. Like I know it's kind of
Mhm.
old, and that's when like call waiting was a thing. We didn't have cell
Yeah.
phones, but
Uh-huh.
like you could like mute someone so that you didn't know there was
Right.
a did that to someone,
I
but I had it
remember
done
those
to me.
days.
But I mean, there were things I remember making fun of a girl's lipstick. So I mean, I'm the bully in that case. You know what I mean? So we all have like the dynamic of being both sometimes,
Mhm.
and how do you see that in the school today that it's different from when we were growing up? Obviously, the technology is different. Has it gotten worse? Has it gotten to a different degree?
Um, in a way, I want to say yes. Bullying is bullying. I think the word bullying itself gets thrown around a lot when it's not actually bullying. I think a lot of
Right.
times if a kid's mean to you, um, they call it bullying, and that's not what it is. If a kid's mean to you once or twice, that's not bullying. But sometimes relentless bullying takes place. I think what happens now, that's part of what we faced is my kids are not allowed to be on social media or anything like that. They have screens, they can play games, but they're not allowed, there's a lot of parameters there. And I just, there are some lines I'm not willing to cross. That was part of the problem is it leached out of the school walls and into social media. My daughter, it would come back to her at school and she would say, I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't have that app. I'm not allowed to be on social media. I don't, why are you talking? And so I think I don't know that it's worse in the sense that people are still doing it, but because it's so easy to bully someone in a cyber sort of way instead of to their face, I think that more kids are apt to do it. And we're just kind of giving them a phone or a tablet and letting them go and not monitoring what they're doing. And so, yeah. And then it comes back to the school and I mean, and I can, I can even defend the school systems a little bit on this. One, their hands are tied. There's only so much they can do. And I think that I have seen that change in the 20 years that I've been in education. When I started teaching, we still practiced corporal punishment. And it was a last effort to get a child to behave, but it was something that was practiced. And you don't really see that anymore. And so
What
a
do you
lot of
mean?
that's
You
coming from
you
the
hitting
top
them with a
down.
ruler or what?
Well, no, we had a paddle. We had a paddle. And yeah, and kids wanted to behave. They didn't want to get the paddle. And now they're just like, what are they going to do to me? That's the attitude that kids have. What are they going to do to me? And the
Yeah.
truth is, there's not much that can be done because the teachers there's only so much they can do. And, beyond that, it goes to a principal. And if you have a principal, even a principal who's a good disciplinarian, there's only so much they can do. It's coming from the top down. And then, on top of that, it's like I said, it leaches outside of the school. And the school can't control what these kids are doing outside of the school walls,
Yeah.
especially if they can't even control what they're doing inside of the school. So, I don't want to say that it's gotten worse, but I think technology has just made it easier
Well, and
for a
you
lot of
bring up a
kids.
good point with that because how many ways could you manipulate if two girls and myself are on a phone line? Like we didn't even have a way to record that conversation, right? Who's
Right.
the only one
Right.
mad at you or who's the only one that you're embarrassed that you said that? It's just that
Right.
other girl that was mute on that phone, right? You
Mhm.
can now take anything and manipulate it to look like Jenny said this, or, that
Yeah.
you can. I mean, just thinking off my head, and this is probably like an old school way to do it, but I'm sure it's been done. Change contact in your phone to say, like, oh, this is Jenny, when really it's Barbara. But hey,
Mhm.
Barbara, text me that you had, whatever relations with this guy. And, now it looks like Jenny said that. So now you're
Yeah.
putting that on social media or Snapchatting or whatever they even do now.
Yeah.
And,
I
or
don't.
changing, the heads of somebody and make it manipulate to like, oh, that picture is her, but it's really not. They've just manipulated it to be. So I didn't really think about that, but it is that part is
Yeah.
technology's gotten so so far beyond what we ever had. We had like an AIM
And I
buddy
mean,
list when I was in middle school. You couldn't
yes,
do a whole
I
lot.
can't relate. And I remember thinking things were so bad then, but I cannot imagine being a preteen or a teenager right now. It's just unbelievable what they
Yeah,
can do.
that is scary. And the other aspect of that is the parents are not even aware of what can go on each app, okay? Because and I can attest to this for just trying to run a podcast and I started an Instagram page a year ago for it. And it is so hard as an old person to learn like how to put together a reel with music and
I
this
know.
shot and that shot and text and it's like I can't even imagine. Then you've got other apps like TikTok and Snapchat and LinkedIn and Pinterest and Facebook.
No.
And so it's like there's so many avenues that kids can be doing things on that there is just no way a parent can even control all of it because it's so hard to learn it all.
Sure, yeah. It's unbelievable. Like, and it seemed like I remember, when Facebook started and you had to be a college kid and I was in college.
Yes,
Yeah.
me
And
too.
so I was like, "Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm so cool." And then it just blew up from there. And I'll have people like I have an Instagram account. I have a Twitter or an X or whatever it's called. But, I just don't use I'm not on TikTok. I'm not on Snapchat. So when the kids are talking about that stuff, I'm just like, you're over my head at this point. I just don't know. And then, I feel like that old person who's just, but I don't know. It's overwhelming how much they can do. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in all your spare time, you wrote a book. Why don't you
Right.
tell us? Why don't you tell us about that? I'm currently writing a children's book, but, which
Yes, I saw
I thought
that.
would be easier because it's a children's book, but I don't know. Why don't you tell me about yours?
Well, I just like to write. I was an English teacher when I taught. I've always loved to write, and I've done a couple of blogs over time. Never had a very big audience, but just enjoyed writing. And so I did it as much for myself as anybody else. But when I started homeschooling, my blog sort of took a turn in the subject and the niche sort of that I was taking with it. I had a bunch of questions, and a lot of it was, why do you homeschool? How do you do it and work? And just things like that. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to drive some traffic to my blog, because when people ask me that question, I'm going to say, go to my blog. And I wrote a post about that, and you can read it. So I started writing a blog post, that kind of answered some of those questions, but it turned into something that was really incredibly long for a blog post. And so I thought, you know what? I'll just do a series of blog posts. But I was kind of growing, I don't want to say bored, and I don't want to say burnout with my blog, but I just felt like I had reached a point where I was like, I need to do something different, because I had been doing it for quite a while. I had put a lot of money into it and a lot of time into it, and I really didn't have a very big audience. And it seemed like my audience was dropping. And so I thought, you know what? I'm not even going to post these. I'm not going to post these as blog posts. I'm just going to put them into a book. And I don't know where it's going to go from here, but I'm going to just write this book. So I just kind of transitioned it, turned them into chapters. And when I got finished writing the book, I put it away for a little while. And then I came back to it, and I started doing some editing, and I thought, you know what? I'll see if I can find a publisher. So I started looking, and I was rejected three times. I don't even know. I can't remember which publishers rejected me, but I did. I started looking and searching for publishers. And I think at one point I even attempted to see if I could get an agent who could find a publisher, and I was rejected. But I just kind of kept trying. And one day I got a phone call that said, hey, we really like your concept. We'd like to publish your book. And I already had a transcript. And so I sent that to them. And, the process probably took, I think I was told it would take between 6 and 8 months. It probably took more like 9 or 10 months. But within a year of signing a contract with them, I had a published book. So, and it's a quick read. It's, I was glad that I wasn't under a contract that told me I had to have a certain, thank you. I had
I
to have
got
a
it right
certain number of
here.
words or anything like that. Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just kind of how it happened. And I thought, you know what, I'll tell our story. And that's kind of how the book came about.
That's really cool. Yeah, I didn't even go like to the publishing route because it's like, yes, they talk about how you have to have like a literary agent, and then it just seems like I was like, I don't have time for all that rejection right now. I'm just
Right.
gonna self-publish it. But then I don't
Yeah.
know. This is kind of a lot of work too.
It is.
I think
I'm
maybe it would have been
actually
easier.
working on another book right now. And that's what I told my husband not long ago. I was like, if I publish this next book that I'm working on, and I'm working on a fiction book, I'm like, I'm probably just going to self-publish it. But then I thought, I don't know. There's no easy way to do it. But, now that I've done it once, I kind of have the desire to do it again. So
Yeah.
I'm excited. I started writing a fiction book when I was in college. I wrote about 3 or 4 chapters. I put it away for 20 years, and I finally picked it back up a couple years ago and started, a little bit at a time writing, and I'm finally kind of getting close to being finished with it. So I'm hoping I'll publish it as well, but that's still a ways away. But I may go a different route this time. But yeah, because this was a lot of work and a lot of money. It's expensive to publish a book,
Mhm.
but it's still something that I'm proud of, and I'm excited about it.
So it's called Making the Switch: Our Family's Journey from Public School to Homeschool from Leigh Ann Scott. And yeah, that's really cool. Um, I and it's funny from what I've learned so far, the writing is like the smallest part of the whole book publishing process because
Sure.
marketing
Mhm.
is huge. I don't know now if you have to how much marketing you have to do if you were published by a publisher, but as a
Yeah.
self-publisher, you're the only one driving your bus. So
Yeah.
you're only going to get
Yeah.
sales if you put in the marketing effort. How is it with being published by a publisher?
They do a little bit of work for you. The publisher that I'm working with has done some press releases and things like that as far as pushing the book to retailers. So you can get my book on Amazon, but you can also get it on like Barnes and Noble online, and things like that. and it's possible to get it in a brick and mortar store, especially if people go in and say, hey, will you put this book on your shelf? But so they're doing some of those things where they're pushing it out, and they're doing press releases to some of the different locations where they could sell it. But honestly, you still kind of have to be your own cheerleader. And so I've
Yeah.
done a lot of trying to promote it myself, but that's really, really, really hard. Because I don't have I don't have a big Instagram account or a big Facebook following. I don't have, so I've just been trying to reach out to other people, especially people who I
Mhm.
know have read the book, and ask for reviews and things like that. But even that it's hard. I'm not very good at asking for that stuff anyway,
Mhm.
but it's just kind of hard because people will say, oh yeah, I'll do that. And then they may never get to it. So you do really have to be your own cheerleader. And that probably, that is much harder than the actual writing part of the book, for sure.
Yeah, especially with the whole online life. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my
Yeah.
goodness, yeah, lots to learn, but it's fun,
Hmm.
and it,
It is.
especially being, I had a very mundane job for so long that, now I'm like, okay, I like learning and being creative. So, it is
Mhm.
nice. It's just hard. It is hard with little kids, but I'm afraid if I don't do it right now, kind of like you said, the homeschool revolution, which I probably should have named the podcast that. Like that, the homeschool revolution. If it's not already,
Yeah.
oh wait, no, that's Kirk Cameron's movie, isn't it?
Is that what? I don't know.
Yeah, you know what I think, which I didn't see, but I do want to see.
I don't think I've seen it either.
Okay, so never mind, name's taken. But there is, so I was like, I wanna do it now while I'm genuinely, like, doing this podcast so I can learn about homeschooling, and then just putting it out there because, well, if it's helping me, I'm sure other people wanna know about it too. Yeah, so that's funny. So, where am I going? I had all these lists of questions, I'll just edit that part out. So, okay, you have 4 kids, and I know that you said
Hmm.
that you work and then you come home and do the homeschool with them at that time. But it is hard because, well, all right, so the older 3 are really the only ones that you have to do anything with, because your 5-year-old is in a
Right.
preschool, so, like, whatever she's needs to learn is getting done there, which really isn't anything.
Right.
She could just play at this age.
She's
But
playing. Yeah.
for the 3 of them, how do you
Hmm.
juggle it? And what sort of curriculums are you using?
I do a lot of, I have a background in teaching. I'd spent most of my time in the classroom teaching language arts. I've done some social studies. Those were my two certification areas. But so a lot of what I do with language arts is I have used some curriculums before, but like a lot of what I do is just trying to kind of see what they need. My youngest son needs a lot of help with writing and reading. So that's what we do. We read, and I have him like write a sentence summary about what we're doing. So I don't really use a curriculum for language arts. Um, my two boys, really, I started using The Good and the Beautiful with them that first year for math, and I really like the way that it tracks and the way that it constantly reviews. But I didn't really do as much research on it as I wish I had, and I like it. I like the books, and I like the way that it works. But after our second year, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to use that anymore. I didn't really like the origins of it after I had done some more reading and research. But the boys actually begged me to get that one back. They loved it. And so I told them that we would keep doing it for this year until I found another curriculum that I liked better. So we've been using it, and then just for math for them. And then my oldest child, so I don't really use one set curriculum. I use a lot of different stuff, or not one at all. For my youngest son, for social studies, we read a lot of biographies and books. For science and social studies, I do not use a curriculum for that. And I've been doing some geography with my oldest two kids for social studies this year. We've been doing some earth science for science this year, and they've been learning about, weather, clouds, the rain cycle, rocks. They had a rock collection at one point. We had to decide what kind of rocks they were. So we're using sort of semi using a curriculum for that, but it's not very strict. But my daughter uses master books a lot, and I have actually really, really liked it. And she's going to be in high school next year, or starting, her ninth grade year. So I think that I will probably be primarily using master books for her through high school, because we've done that already, and we really like it. But I think one of those things that I thought when I started homeschooling, and that was one of the things where I was like taken aback a little bit, was, oh, I'm going to buy these curriculums and then we're going to reuse them every year. And I'll put a huge investment into this curriculum, but we'll reuse it. Well, I can tell you right now that the stuff my daughter's doing, my oldest son will not be able to do. It's just not going to be up his alley. So I'm going to have to find something else for him. It's just not going to be for him because he's not like her. So that was kind of a misconception on my part. And I should know that because I've been a teacher and I know that not everything you teach or every strategy you use or every curriculum is going to be for everybody, even though, when you're in school, it kind of has to be. But so I've decided, I'm gonna start looking for some things for him so that in a couple years when he's in high school, we'll probably be doing something different. I'm just not sure what it will be yet.
Yeah. And that's why I had actually started it's a curriculum series, like a
Uh-huh.
subscription-based curriculum series for $3 a month. Really just talking
Yeah.
to people, like delving deep into what does each curriculum actually like what does your day to day look like? Because there
Yeah.
are so many and everybody knows the good and the beautiful because it's just popular, right? And that's what we use
Yeah.
too in
It
this
is.
house. But I'm like, how do I know that this is so popular because it's the best and not just because they have the best marketing strategy, you know?
Yeah. And
So,
because it's
like,
pretty.
yeah, I don't know all the other ones out there. So, I've had some really cool
Yeah.
conversations with different people. Math inspiration sounds like a really cool
Hmm.
concept about like
Hmm.
it's the child is actually teaching themselves and it's cool. But there math with confidence is another one. So yeah, there's so
Yes.
many out
Hmm.
there. It's so
There
hard
are.
to know. And you can read what a website says, but that doesn't really get into the nitty-gritty of like how long does each
Right.
lesson take? Do your kids really like it? What does the day-to-day look like? Are there a ton of games? Or is there a ton of writing? So that's what I kind of get into. And I would love to hear about master books a little bit more if you want to come back on sometime and really like give us the lowdown on what that is, especially
Hmm.
for like older kids, because we're
Hmm.
we're always worried about the younger ones, and then it's like, well, what are we gonna do with them later on?
Yeah, yeah, and that's when it gets hard. Yeah, because I can't do some of that stuff. Some of that math
Right.
is over my head, so it's hard. But I think for me, curriculum, I learned right off the bat. There's probably more homeschool curriculums out there than there are curriculums that are being used by like public and private schools. It's amazing how much stuff is out there. And I just think about these people who used to homeschool way, way back in maybe the 80s or this. And I'm like, they had nothing
Yeah.
compared to what we had.
Yeah.
And it's almost too much because it's so overwhelming. My
Yes.
main thing is I want our curriculum to be Christian based. And if it's Christian based, I will look at it. I don't want a secular curriculum because we're not a secular family. But there's tons of secular curriculums out there too. So, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to go through all of that. And I'm
Yeah.
still hearing and learning about more and more all the time.
Yep. Yes, it is like a black hole. And it's
It
all good.
definitely
It's
is.
not a bad thing, but it is hard to know
No.
what would be the best option for your child when you don't
Hmm.
know all of them, really what's in depth and all the supplemental stuff. Because that's where I get kind of caught up too. Like, oh, well, that sounds like a wonderful supplement, but wait, where do I fit it in? And I guess
Yeah.
part of me has, one of my questions that I asked on the curriculum series is how many lessons is this? Because does it take you the
Hmm.
full year? Or can you take December off and put in maybe a
Hmm.
Christmas supplement, or
Yeah.
something like that?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that I really am trying to like, develop something that's like, these are all your options. These are things you could do, and
Yeah.
I'm sure it's been done before, but I don't know. It just seems like that's
It's
a
hard
good
to get
path for me.
away sometimes. I think when there's a curriculum and you're like, okay, day 1, day 2, day 3, it's hard to get away from that. But that's one of the things that I think I had a hard time with in the beginning was I wanted to fit everything in. But even with the good and the beautiful, there were all these supplement things that went with it. And I was trying to do those too, but my lessons were taking forever. And the kids were like, I don't want to do this anymore. I might as well be in school. And I just finally learned, we're going to do the basics. And if I don't do everything, and like I said, we don't do everything every day anyway, but like with my youngest son, I go through and I'm like, if I know that he knows how to do it, I'm like, we're not even going to do those problems because I know you can do them. Or if I'm like, those are practice problems. I've already taught you how to do that. there might be 8 problems for him to do in the workbook. And I'm like, we'll pick 2. You can do 2 of them. So we don't necessarily do it all. And I've kind of learned to just kind of go with the flow. And I mean, the whole point, part of the reason we homeschool is to meet the individual needs of our kids. And our kids are not all the same. And so, it's hard. It's hard for my 12-year-old to sit at the table for a very long time and do schoolwork. So I try to keep the lessons short. And, he doesn't have to do everything every time. And sometimes we'll skip a lesson if it's something we feel like he already knows or whatever. So it's hard to get past that though. Once you kind of get comfortable with that, you're like, okay, but it's really hard to get past that when you've paid for this box of curriculum. It is, but it's just one of those things you kind of have to gear it towards your kid.
Absolutely. And to close out, you have a good perspective because you are in the school system. You've been there for a long time. All right. We think, and this was one of the biggest eye openers for me in doing this podcast. We think as parents that there are certain things our kids have to know by certain ages, and there actually is not.
No.
So, like, that was the biggest thing. I was like, wait, they don't need to know like multiplication by 7th grade or whatever. Like, I I had no idea. Now, granted, and I was going to ask you this too. There are requirements in certain states for reporting. And if you could just tell us what the reporting requirements are for Kentucky.
Yeah, Kentucky's pretty laid back. I'll give you that. There's not a lot, like we don't have to participate in any kind of standardized testing or anything like that. The only thing that the law really requires in Kentucky is that we report to our local school district within the first couple of weeks that they start school. So we don't have to start school when they start, but we have to report. And that's just for attendance purposes for them so that we aren't considered truant. So we don't have to, as long as we report to our local school district, we're good. We have no parameters on curriculum. They don't have to do any kind of standardized testing. In Kentucky, you don't legally have to start schooling until age 6. So like even my 5-year-old, I'll probably start her in kindergarten next year, but I don't actually have to until she turns 6, which would be the next school year. So, and with her, I may do 2 school years. When we report, we don't have to tell what grade our kids are in or what grade level they are on. We just have to report these kids at this address are homeschooling. So it's pretty basic. They ask that we follow whatever our district does as far as like report cards and things like that. So like my district works on quarters. So they do quarterly report cards within 2 semesters. I do keep grades for my kids just for the sake of if anybody ever comes and says, okay, I just need to know that you're actually schooling your kids, I can give them that evidence. I don't think it's ever going to happen. But as far as, asking, if anybody ever comes asking me, the only thing I'm legally bound to show them is that I do have grades for my kids or a transcript for my high schooler, and I keep attendance. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. There's really not a lot to it in Kentucky. So we are pretty laid back, and I'm so very grateful for that because it made that transition really, really easy for me.
Yeah. So then to lead back to the question I was going to before, what do you see with your background and education? What do you see that you need to prepare your kids for, whether it be college and these are the sort of classes or types of subjects that they need before they enter that, or if college is even part of your goal? Having 4 degrees yourself, is that something that you now look at your kids and say, maybe they don't need it or maybe they do?
No, I don't think it's for everybody. I don't think college is for everybody. I've always felt that way. I wasn't even sure it was for me when I first started. But, I look at my kids, and some of my kids are way too young for me to really predict that yet. But my oldest kids, I can tell you, one of them probably will go to college, or at least right now, our aspiration is to get her college ready. The other one, he doesn't want to. He's like, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to college. And that's okay with me. So what I tell my kids is, my boys especially, is you need to be able to have a good job and support a family. And so that's what we're working toward. What kind of work, are you interested in? My daughter, like I said, she may go to college, and we're working toward making sure that her high school transcript will be have her college ready. She may actually decide not to, and that's okay. But like already, she has a love for animals. She's fostering a dog right now that is on track to become a service dog for a program that provides service dogs for disabled veterans. So she's taking a dog training course, and she's going to be a certified dog trainer, and she's only 14. And so she's already working towards things, and she thinks that her goals and aspirations may have something animal related. Maybe she wants to be a groomer or a trainer or a vet tech or something like that. And so she's already working towards stuff like that. So I just kind of, I think my goal with them is to take their lead, figure out what they want to do, and then try to develop their schooling around that, especially once they get to high school.
Yeah. And I think, and mine is the same. I think the challenge for me is now, how do I expose them to all the different things that are out there
Yeah.
to kind of find where their
Yeah.
niche is and what really makes them
Sure.
happy? Because that is
Yeah.
my
And that's hard.
one biggest gripe with public school or even private school. It doesn't matter, but is that it does not expose you to all the options that are out there. It gives you like 3, and
Yeah.
then you just kind of fall where you fall. But there's
Mm-hmm.
so many jobs out there, or jobs
Yeah.
that could be created, and
Right. Yeah.
school kind
That
of
aren't even a
stifles that.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It's hard. It's hard. And I feel that. And that actually, even thinking about that is a little bit overwhelming, but that's just kind of my goal. Like, what are you interested in? Now let's see. And, maybe they do some work in that area and then they go, yeah, nope, that's not for me. And that's okay. Because at least they had that exposure and now they know, as opposed to going through 4 years of college and getting a degree and then going, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
So, and that happens. That happens a lot. And it's probably because a lot of kids just don't have that exposure. So I'm right there with you. I'm just going to try to give them as much as I can. And I'm going to try to tailor everything to meet their needs.
Okay, last question I just thought of. Your book, Making the Switch, Our Family's Journey from Public School to Homeschool. How does your employer
Mm-hmm.
feel about this book getting
I have,
published by you?
yeah, that was my biggest concern. I thought, what are they going to think? But the truth is, by the time that book came out, it was pretty well known that I homeschool my kids. Everybody who I work with knows that I homeschool my kids, because even at the time I was working in the same school they went to. And when I pulled them out, I wasn't still working in that school anymore, but everybody I worked with knew. So I haven't really heard much from them as far as, I've had a couple people congratulate me on the book. I don't know that anybody has read it, and that's okay, because they're probably not the right audience for it, and that's fine. But, I was worried about a little bit of negative, impact on that, but it has not been bad at all. And
Oh, that's
everybody's,
good.
if they have negative comments, they've kept them to themselves, and that's okay with me.
And where can people find you or the book if they want to check it out?
Yeah. So I have an Instagram account called Living the Scott Life. And I have a Facebook page called Living the Scott Life. So you can find me on either one of those. And the book is available pretty much anywhere you can find books. It's, most people are buying it on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com.
Leigh Ann, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been an awesome conversation.
Thanks, Cheryl. And I just have to tell you, I listen to a lot of podcasts because I'm like you, I'm a learner. I like to learn a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I always hear people interviewing somebody, and it's always somebody who's like a PhD or an expert in their field. And I always learn a lot. And this may even not sound the way that I hope I mean it, but you're out there interviewing moms and dads who are just doing it. We're not necessarily experts. We're just out there homeschooling our kids, and we're trying to learn from each other. So every time I listen to one of your episodes, I learned something different from somebody from some other place in the country. So I think it's really cool that you're just out there interviewing people who are just doing the homeschool thing. And I love that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, make it a little bit more relatable, right? I was getting
Yes.
a little intimidated listening to homeschooling podcasts when I first started listening to them. I was like, they all sound like they have their life so
Yeah.
together. I can't do that.
Yeah.
So I try
Yeah.
to keep it real.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. Thank
Thank
you
you
for
for
being here
having me.
today.
I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.